Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. Joining me in the studio today, Warren Parad. Warren, how are you?
Thanks for having me back. I actually have a good fact for today that I thought was really interesting to share. There's a malware out there called OtterCookie. And I know the economy for engineers is not so great at the moment. However, a lot of advertisements out there for job recs may be from malicious attackers who are trying to get you to run GitHub repos or download packages from the internet to pass the interview. And those things will get installed on your machine and either try to steal your local crypto wallets or worse, be used for attacking whichever company you do get hired by. So I know it's a real struggle that you want to complete whatever take-home assignment or get the next job, but you really got to be careful in today's economy because this tech is out there that's just waiting to capitalize on a simple mistake.
That's just nuts. Like, let's just kick someone while they're down, right?
Yeah. Like, all of that is nuts. I think getting homework from an interview is nuts. I think, potentially installing something on your computer that's going to make your computer go wild is not like, it's multiple levels of crazy.
Speaking of which, hi, Jillian. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me back.
You guys are making me feel guilty. Thanks for having me back. Like, it's conditional at this point. Just show up.
I don't know. I'm not sure that it is for me, but, thank you.
I'm still appreciative for being here, I guess, is what I'll say.
Well, I'm happy to have you both here. You guys make my job a lot more fun and entertaining. And speaking of fun and entertainment, I'm looking forward to this episode. We have Alex Kearns joining us in the studio today, principal solution architect from, dude, you just told me how to say this, and my mind already went blank.
UberTask Consulting.
UberTask Consulting.
I've heard every possible permutation of how to pronounce it. But you did pronounce my surname correctly, which a lot of people don't do.
Well, welcome to the show, man. I'm happy to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Cool. So give us a little bit about your background now that we know how to pronounce where you work.
Yeah, great. I mean, I come from a software engineering background, if you kind of go way back to the post-university career, and then made the move into cloud, both kind of internal consultancy and sort of platform type work, and then consultancy in terms of the traditional customer external facing consultancy. But I'm still very technically driven. I like getting my hands dirty. That for me is what's the most exciting part. It's building things, breaking things, learning from it. Paper architecture is not my fun.
I hear you. There's like a certain, I think for people who succeed in this industry for a long time, there's a certain amount of entertainment value that you get from your job.
Oh, I'm definitely doing it wrong then. I mean, my new belief is that when I retire, I'm just going to go back into drawing boxes and lines. Like, that's just like the best part of my job. Like when I can get on a piece of paper or a whiteboard and boxes and lines, not even any words necessarily. Like, that's prime enjoyment right there.
I'm going to get my typewriter and I'm going to go to my cabin in Montana. Screw all you guys.
So speaking of just like, I'm going to do something really simple and turn my brain off, I bought like a paint by numbers kit, and that has been, it just reminded me a lot of what you said, because I just sit there and I just paint in the numbers, and I don't care that I'm nearly 40 and doing an adult, like an activity for children. It's great. And it's just so, you just turn your brain. It's great. It's great. Anyways.
I've actually heard quite a few people comment how like therapeutic and relaxing that is.
They really are. They're very relaxing. It's great.
I think you need things. It's the tech industry. Brains are so switched on all the time. There has to be a way to switch off. Otherwise, work-life balance is pretty nil.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because actually very commonly we keep being in a always production mode. Like everything we do is happening at a critical level, and we have to pass that test. Like whatever work we're doing, there's no practice involved. It's always runtime for us. And there's a lot that there's a bunch of research out there that says like we have to go into practice mode where mistakes can be made, failures can be had, and we can actually learn from it intentionally. And without that, we will that's actually one of the biggest causes of burnout. So, if it's going home and doing watercolor, water painting, whatever it takes there, if that somehow helps you recharge realistically, definitely do it.
There's also a lot of evidence showing that taking on those kind of activities, while you're not consciously thinking about the problem, your subconscious is continuing to work on it. And that's when some of like the big insights and big breakthroughs for you occur. Like I know there's a really common anecdote of like when you're in the shower and you have this great idea, that's like a really fixed example of that whole process in action.
Yes, it's so true.
I don't do important jobs anymore. Like I'm just not doing them. Fine. They matter, but not on like a huge, I'm always in production, everything has to be perfect. Like it's fine. It'll be fine if it's done a couple days later. I used to do important stuff though, and I don't want to anymore. So I suppose that's your lesson, is this is where I'm at, doing my paint by numbers and things that don't really matter.
Well, one of the things we were talking about before we started recording the episode was leveraging Gen AI. And Alex, you've got some experience with that, specifically some experience of like real world examples where you've done that. And I think that's one of the cool things about AI. It goes through this buzz cycle, but people who are actually putting it to real world use. So I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. It's something where you go back 18 months, maybe. ChatGPT was kind of just about starting to be established as almost household name. People aren't necessarily using it actively, but tools like that are becoming more and more common. And then I think with any technology, it's when it gets kind of democratized, when it gets put in the hands of people that aren't having to spend millions on hardware and do those kind of things, it actually really starts to become an awful lot more prevalent. So I think as we saw with any technology, so you think back to kind of mid 2010s, I suppose, where things like AWS Lambda came out, so kind of serverless technologies, and then the years after that where every SaaS company that existed was going for we now have a serverless offering. And it's like, well, is it serverless? Is it just managed service? What is your definition of serverless?
Right.
So you see the buzz around that. You see buzz around even cloud, which is, cloud is public cloud, 20 years old if you go back to AWS's first service. So it's not new, it's not shiny anymore. And AI, I think, is going through the same thing, but just at a much, much faster pace. So
that's a really interesting comparison, though. Like I want to stop you for a second there, because I feel like there's sort of a weird duality where serverless made it easier for people to get into building stuff and releasing applications because it didn't require you to purchase or allocate huge data center capacity in order to make that happen. I feel like where the point is AI is currently at is it actually does require only the most expensive access to hardware or service providers to be able to get that. So I don't know if it's been democratized yet. There's a lot of services out there that claim to get you access to some facet of AI. And I know there's like ChatGPTs and LLMs out there that questionable how much value they're returning to you. But I think for like the real core aspect of being able to provide the underlying resources or technology to people, I think it's still much too far away.
I think the way you described it is great. It's giving people access to a facet of AI. If we think about AI as a general topic, artificial intelligence more broadly has been around for decades. It's only really that when you sort of start breaking it further down into machine learning and deep learning and now generative AI is a kind of subset of that, that the generative AI and the AI terminologies are now almost interchangeable, certainly from an industry perspective. I think it very much depends on what people are wanting to do with AI and how specific their use case is. So if we think about things like ChatGPT, that's obviously a very specific use case. It gives you very generic responses to things. It hasn't got access to your specific business data, but it's free. And obviously, with any free product, you are normally the product. Of course, you can opt out of things, but by default, it's collecting that chat history to improve the service for everyone. You've then got things like Amazon Bedrock. So Bedrock was AWS's generative AI offering that came out at their conference 2023 that was announced. So Bedrock offers kind of two different modalities, I suppose, in how you can use it. One is on demand, where you pay per 1,000 tokens. So that's a way where you can go and build something. Again, it's similar to ChatGPT in its sense of it's generic knowledge. It's whatever the large language model has been trained on. But because, as with any kind of cloud-hosted managed service, they can take advantage of economies of scale and give you pay-as-you-go pricing. The moment that you want to fine-tune that model or train a different model with your specific data, you go from paying kind of fractions of a cent per 1,000 tokens to having to commit to 30,000 for 3 months, because you are now the one that's bearing the cost of all of that hosting rather than AWS making it available. And of course, there are ways that you can augment the use of large language models with your own data without going to that extent. So even just including examples of your specific data in a prompt, or kind of retrieval augmented generation where you can load your own documents into a vector database and have it retrieve that data from there. There's lots of ways you can kind of get quite a long way without spending huge amounts of money. But yeah, the moment you want to get to I have complete control of my model, I train it with my specific data, then you'd hope that that's when you start getting to the type of customers who can afford to spend that kind of money.
So in your capacity at your current job where you're interfacing with clients and whatnot, do you find there is one particular provider or one set of tools that you're constantly going to, or whole breadth of set, but for different types of tasks to help assist you?
Yeah, so I think we are an AWS consultancy, so everything tends to center around Amazon tools. But of course, Azure and Google both have AI offerings now as well. Obviously, Microsoft, with their investment into OpenAI, are the only provider that offer the OpenAI models on a public cloud. And I think that will stay the same for a number of years. In terms of the tools that we reach to, there's definitely a combination of kind of vendor specific, but also open source tools. So in terms of hosting large language models, the kind of most frictionless way to access them is through Amazon Bedrock. Really, really straightforward API, easy to write scripts to interact with that, either synchronous, asynchronous, chat, however you need to. But then you can start to bring in open source tools. So things like LangChain is a really popular open source framework where you can use Bedrock, you can use Microsoft's hosted models, Google, OpenAI, however you need to interact with your large language models, and then bring in those other parts like retrieval augmented generation, where you can say, I've got a database full of documents. These are my business documents, my sales reports, my financial reports, whatever they need to be. And then when your large language model takes your prompt, it can then use that data that you've provided without having to specifically train the model to augment the generation of its response. And there's lots of open source tools that can do things like that. I think what will be really interesting as these kind of, I want to say years, but I think it's going to be months with how things are going at the moment. As the next few months go by, so many open source packages are popping up, but it's how these open source packages stay around long term. So it's, unless they are backed by a big business, what makes them commercially sustainable? I think we've seen frameworks like Crew AI, which is a framework for building AI agents and multiple agents, and kind of orchestrating like what agent would get called for a particular type of task. They've now introduced sort of a commercial model where they can take on some of the management and observability around those agents, or you can just use the framework open source.
So I feel like I want to ask about that. You're supporting your customers in utilizing AI within their businesses. Have you seen a significant change, say over, I think things are changing very frequently in a month period. So, compared to, early 2023 to now, what's the next thing? Like, what are customers now most interested in utilizing? Is it one of the particular providers more so than others? Is it just a smattering of everything? Or do you really see something taking off specifically in the businesses that you're working with?
So I think it's worth making it kind of provider agnostic and thinking more use case and drivers for use of AI. So thinking back 12 months or even 24 months, there was a lot more of the people wanting to use AI for the sake of using AI. So we've had conversations with customers who have said, my board member has said, as a business, we've got to be using AI because investors want to see it, public needs to see it. Can you help us use AI? It's like, well, of course, but let's take that step back. Let's try and work out where there is a genuine use case. I think we're kind of getting through, if we use the Gartner hype cycle as a framework, I suppose, here, where I think we've definitely passed that peak of inflated expectations, that kind of top of the hype cycle where everyone is using AI for the sake of using AI. People want to do way more with it than is really feasible and ethical, sustainable, everything. And we're now, I think we're starting to quite rapidly get into that point of what the hype cycle terms as the trough of disillusionment, where people are thinking, I'm seeing AI so much. Every service, every tool, every news article. I mean, even in the UK today, our Prime Minister came out and announced a big plan for rolling out AI and growth programs across the country. So it's gone from just those big tech providers to government, to politics, to everything. It dominates everywhere. And I think it's almost sort of starting to see a little bit of fatigue in companies where it is a case of every vendor is talking to us about AI or their latest AI powered offering. And that next stage, which I don't think we're far away from now, is working out and really being visible the use cases for AI that are here to stick around. So the
I
one
want to. Yeah, no, I totally get it. I mean, it is quite in the media; it's everywhere, as you said. And I sort of want to ask our resident ML expert here, what she's seen, comparative to what you brought up. I know she loves to talk about it.
I love AI. I think AI is very cool. I'm still really seeing people on the upward side of the hype cycle. Like I have a small AI service that I offer. I had to stop offering it like publicly because people were just coming in with these very outsized expectations. And now I'm like, okay, we have to schedule like a 10-15 minute talk first so that I can adjust some of these expectations and things. But besides that, I think it's great if you're using it kind of for what it's good at, and then it's terrible if you're not. Like, I think probably a lot of the public policy stuff might be a little bit maybe a little bit like outsized in terms of what it can do, but maybe people making these kind of requests and just being like, well, shouldn't it be doing this? That's probably what's going to drive innovation forward. So I have kind of like mixed feelings about it, I guess.
Well, I think there's like, I want to drill in on that for a second. Like you having the right expectations for it. Alex and Jillian, y'all both brought that up. What are some of the good use cases where you've seen AI really make a difference, Alex?
So I can talk about one kind of specific customer use case where, as part of a migration, there was we had 250 PHP cron jobs that were running on an on-premises server. These were some of these were 15 years old, kind of dating back sort of PHP, early PHP 5 and PHP 4 with some of them. And some of them were little scripts, some of them were 50 lines, some of them were 400 or 500 lines. And then you have the ones that import from different files. And we kind of took the view of, actually, is there a way we can do something here to speed up the analysis of these scripts? There are a few things that we need to know. We need to know what databases does this script talk to? Does it interact with any other services? So APIs. Does it interact with things like, in the case of the on-premises servers, things like the send mail binary on a server, because this particular customer, for the rest of their business, used a managed SMTP service now, and not just sending emails from on-premises servers. So we did a bit of a proof of concept around primarily just as a way to speed up our own analysis, because nobody wants to read through 250 scripts line by line.
No, say it's not so.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at, just as an example, you said accessing particular database, right? Like if you have calls out to some on-prem or third-party provided data provider and they're migrating to AWS, they may be going to either a NoSQL option or RDS. And so you want to make sure that those get converted, assuming you just port the scripts, lift and shift into EC2s. So, I mean, a question that I may have is, where do you find yourself on the risk scale? Like, what happens if the LLM, which is not going to be perfect, obviously it makes up tables and whatnot that aren't being actually used. That's fine. But I think the false negatives would be more of a problem. Like, what happens if it missed the table? Would that have caused an issue during the migration? And how did you potentially think about mitigating those sorts of risks?
Yeah, so what we did was, rather than kind of invest the time up front to build a fully working solution, it was let's do a test on a few scripts first. Let's try out over 3 or 4 scripts that we have done the analysis by hand on, so we know we've got a golden answer, that there is a ground truth to what we're comparing against. When we did run it across the full data set, then we did dip sampling to make sure that a reasonable proportion of them were accurate. The other thing that we did with these was when migrating those scripts, made use of different environments. So these were going to Kubernetes cluster in AWS, and because we had a dev and a staging and prod environment, we knew that we could run these scripts in a sandbox pre-production environment. If they failed, kind of so be it. It's not going to bring the business down. It's not going to send customers emails, because we can trap emails. We can make sure that any calls outside of a particular network are monitored and blocked. So we could quite easily see, actually, we haven't got to just cut over straight to production. I think the point you're around the risk and the level of trust that we often put in, or people are increasingly putting in large language models, is really interesting, because as you start to see it used in more regulated industries, there's an incredible amount of power, I suppose, that large language models are being given. And when we get to that point of a model being able to be the only process and the only tool in a loop, I don't know, but I don't think we're there yet. Even when you think about more traditional machine learning use cases, like one of my favorites is the kind of fraud detection in banking, where you make a purchase on your credit card. If it doesn't look like something that you would typically do, or it's in a country that you haven't been to before, an anomalous amount, then models should pick that up and say, yeah, it's not a transaction we're going to allow to be processed, because we think it's not you. But that's been honed and refined over probably decades. Are large language models going to be accelerated quickly enough for us to be able to make use of that level of power and that level of trust?
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, these scripts that you were migrating, I mean, worst case scenario is they just didn't run and they didn't necessarily impact user activity. And if they crash, you get the logs and then you can go investigate. Mm-hmm. So using an LLM in this area was inherently unrisky. It just helps speed up the initial analysis. But at the end of the day, it didn't really matter, right? You know, the whole amount of work, it's like, well, a human could have made a mistake there too, and it wouldn't have had that big of an implication. But how are you starting to see customers utilizing AI in a, ones that should be risk averse, but are leaning into it more than they should? And how do you even evaluate that, or how do you better avoid that? And I think you did sort of lean on doing sampling and verifying the outputs, but maybe there's something holistic, because I feel like with the adoption of AI coming more and more, companies will do the wrong thing, right? Engineers will either accidentally, via negligence, or just laziness or whatever it is, get in a state where, like, this is a great way to absolve myself of the challenge of doing all of this work. How do we counteract that?
So I think with customers, we're quite upfront. So I think probably different consultancies, different companies may have an alternative view. But speaking from a employed official hat, if a customer is trying to do something that doesn't make sense, and we don't think there's going to be kind of significant business value in it, then we will be aware, be open about that, and make the customer aware that actually what they're doing with it isn't likely to be successful. Obviously, if there are ethical or legal concerns around what they're doing, then kind of we're a technical consultancy. We can raise concerns, make customers aware, but ultimately due diligence is on a customer side.
is coming though, right? Like I really would like to see some concrete accountability. I mean, we don't have anything quite to the level of the Knight Capital disaster where they lost I want to say like $460 million. And that didn't involve AI at all. That was just pure automation and legacy systems causing a mistake. And now we definitely have automated car companies that I believe there was an incident where there was a death in Arizona or New Mexico a lot of years ago, and the company didn't get sued or anything like that. So, I mean, it does seem like accountability is something that's going to come up more and more. And I don't really see anyone working on adequate safeguards here. I mean, there's we're afraid of AI, but we're not really talking about the companies that are utilizing it, I feel like.
So I think there's two parts. There's accountability and there's explainability as well. So again, thinking more about traditional machine learning, some algorithms are significantly more explainable than others. So there are a lot of algorithms, and increasingly so as we get into the generative AI and large language model space, where they're a bit of a black box. They have a load of data that go in, and it's very hard to explain why a particular result has come out. And again, models aren't deterministic, so you can do as much testing as you want, but you can never be truly 100% certain. You can be very, very confident, but if anybody can give 100% guarantee, then there probably isn't machine learning that's making the final call.
Yeah, but you can ask the model if it's correct, right?
Yeah.
It's right. I mean, if it says it's right, it's obviously right. Haven't you ever helped a kid with their math homework before? Same thing.
There's some interesting stuff that that AWS are working on. So for a while now, they've had Bedrock guardrails, which is there to try and prevent a large language model from responding about certain topics. But of course, you have to give it a list to start with of topics to not talk about. And if you haven't thought of the topic, then you're reliant upon a human to have that extensive list before you can prevent the model. Another one that's come out very, very recently, and this is within the last month or so, is AWS make use of automated reasoning in all places across their cloud. So when it comes to kind of cryptographic operations and making sure that encryption is doing what it should be doing, and not making sure there's mathematical proof behind some of these operations. That's something that, is being used across all of AWS, but only very recently has now come to Bedrock. And I think the feature is called Bedrock Automated Reasoning, where you can build rules up to say, I want mathematical proof that the response given is in accordance with these rules, which is quite cool. And I'm yet to play with that, but it looks very promising. And AWS are generally fairly good on the research and that side of things. They're certainly not perfect in terms of some of the decisions, I think, around releasing services that are maybe just the wrong side of MVP. We have seen a few times, but that is, I think, a side effect of being customer obsessed, in that perhaps there's a customer that needs a particular set of features, and the easiest way is to build a service for it. But maybe it's not suitable for every use case and every customer just yet. But I think there's some really interesting stuff going on around automated reasoning, around for AWS's first-party models. So the Amazon Nova family of models, they've got the AI service cards, which go into quite a lot of detail about how the models are built and are fairly transparent around the way they work. I think that's something that end users of models need to be more aware of. I think at the moment it's very, very easy to log on to to kind of, or chat.com, I think, is the domain that OpenAI spent quite a lot of money on. Type something, but you don't know where that data has come from to build that response. You don't know the reasoning behind that response being given. I think as these systems get more and more embedded in people's processes and workflows in business, it's needing to understand the why and ask the question of or ask the questions and have the ability to give a because. This has happened because the model is doing this.
I don't know. I worry that if we're relying on education to make people be able to utilize our AI and technology better, I feel like we're not going in the right direction. Like, I say this because very frequently in the security domain, we have the same sort of mantra, whereas you aren't going to stop security events, prevent attackers, remove vulnerabilities through straight education. I mean, there's only so much that you can achieve there. And if your security strategy is educate the users, I mean, you might as well have given up already if that's and I worry if that's the direction that we're going, where, in order to use the models effectively, in order to understand what's going on, you have to be an expert still, which I feel like has been the case for a lot of years now, going back 20, 30 years in our ML development. It's always sort of been the case. And until we can break through that, I feel like, real adoption really isn't going to amount to good things. And we're really close to utilizing it in more and more concerning situations where security is involved or human safety is involved, or whatever Jillian is doing with automatic creation of, protein folding. I honestly can't remember, but I am curious there.
Being the human in the loop. Like that's if we're going to start doom spiraling, it's the greed. Oh man, why is it echoing? What happened? What did I do? Okay, I'm sorry. Ignore me for a few minutes here while I figure out what happened to my camera.
What Jillian's saying is she's worried that she's the human in the loop.
But I'm the greed. I could very well be the greed in this situation. It could happen.
I think there's some really interesting. I think there's some really. I think there's some really interesting ethical bits as well around it. So the topic of kind of self-driving cars has come up a few times as we've been talking, and the things that as a human driving a car, you might instinctively make certain decisions. So if you've got a self-driving car and there is a certainty of a crash, but one scenario means 5 people, one scenario means 2 people, but they are young people, then it's like, what does the car choose? Like, at that point, there's no human emotion, there's nothing in it. It's someone has to program a model to say this life is worth more than this life. And how do you do that, right?
So there was actually an interesting, so this is the trolley problem, right? And it's sort of the moral dilemma more than an ethical one. It was actually released, I think there was a quick study by Stanford where it gauged random sampling of people of which they would pick, like where should the car actually go to. And I think there was, like, at the end of the study, there was like a clear hierarchy of what humans actually preferred. And I feel like it was something like, you should kill cats first, and then old men, and then old women, and then dogs, or something like that. And I think it had to do with the fact that cats will just get out of the way. Like, that was the expectation, that these people will either get out of the way, or, in a worst case scenario, this is what they would pick. And it was really interesting that they had done this. And there was, of course, some, not nice things said about the fact they hadn't gone through with the study. But, I think humans will sort of adapt to preferential picks for what they are okay with.
I think it's as an industry, AI is going to disrupt one way or another. I often see people kind of saying generative AI is going to have as much of an impact as cloud did. And if it is having that much of an impact, then with cloud, there weren't really that many drawbacks that I can think of. There was concerns, there was uncertainty around who owns my data, who controls my data, is my data secure if it's in Amazon's data center versus a server in my own cupboard. But with generative AI, there's almost that kind of rabbit in the headlights approach that a lot of people are taking at the moment, where I think there is a real danger without, as we talked about, without the control, without either education or forced guardrails, to be able to use this effectively. I remember seeing an article, I think it was tail end of last year, and it was policy being talked about in the US, and there were talks of the developer models being legally required to report on things like whether their models could be used for purposes that would have a national security implication, which I think is absolutely right from a moral and security perspective. But there's always that kind of fine balance of any emerging technology. How far do you regulate it? If you regulate it too much, does it stifle or prevent innovation? But then the flip side is, if something terrible happens because somebody has used a large language model to teach themselves how to carry out an attack, then the argument is, well, there wasn't enough regulation.
I think going back to the self-driving car example, the solution there is just go into the settings of the car and you get a little order of preference. Like, I'm okay with hitting this, I'm not okay with hitting this, and then problem solved, right?
It's so tough. It's
I mean, we joke, but like, this is what we unfortunately have to do as humans sometimes. Like, that's how all of healthcare works, right? Like, when there's a shortage, like during COVID, there was the shortage of the ventilators. You think the doctors didn't have to like make decisions? Like it's very unpleasant, and nobody wants to think about them or talk about them. But the reality is, we do anyways, and it has to happen. And I imagine that it also has to be a part of like self-driving cars, because cars are terrible, terrible death machines. I hate driving. Have I mentioned this show yet? Just how much I hate driving and having to have a car. It's such a pain.
I think it's because we're in this intermediary state. Because once we get to the point where there's automation all around us and we have adapted to that fact, it's no longer as big of a problem, because it's whose fault is it if you step in front of a train? It's not like, oh, well, the train was supposed to stop. It was, supposed to know. And some of them do have safety protections in place. But realistically, you don't go on the tracks when the train is coming unless you have some reason you really want to be there. And I think realistically, the same thing will happen if we're in the automated car space where the AI self-autonomous cars are driving around. I mean, realistically, don't step into the street. I mean, why would you go there? And I think with the AI cars, we will want to really redesign egress and flow for traffic. And we will be able to do that effectively once everything has been automated.
I think there's a really interesting change coming in terms of, I guess, similar to what we would have seen with RPA and kind of processes being automated in businesses. Is generative AI going to have be a real kind of step change improvement in efficiency? Is there going to be a resistance from within businesses to work on these generative AI projects because they think it's going to put themselves out of a job? I think it's a really challenging space to try and try and tread the line of improving efficiency versus making redundancies. I think going back many years, you think about things like the Industrial Revolution, and inevitably changes like that mean that some jobs are no longer needed, but those people adapt, they find different roles. And if this kind of continues at the pace that it's going and disrupts industry at the pace it's predicted to, then people need to kind of change with it, because very quickly you're already seeing job adverts that have experience in AI as essential. It's no longer a bonus thing. It's you must be able to work with Copilot tools and effectively know how to integrate AI into DevOps or migrations or anything like that, because companies expect and their customers expect.
It's a really interesting change to see how the job landscape has changed just over the last 12 months with the introduction of AI. It felt like 12 months ago, using Copilot and tools like that was seen as cheating, but now it's just seen as like a part of the job. And I'm interested to hear how it's being like, how are people testing or qualifying your skills for that in the employment space?
I take a fairly agnostic view to use of Copilot like tools. If people want to use them, then that's fine. It comes with other challenges. If someone is over dependent on AI to do the job, and that's masking real true understanding, then I don't think AI really comes into it. Because if you're using AI to generate code, but you don't understand the code that's being generated, then you might have a good chance at building software or building solutions that are going to work, but there's also a pretty good chance that they're not, or you've left a security hole in it, or it's going to cost 10 times as much because there's one best practice that you've not realized because these models were trained on open code. So from my perspective, I mean, I've tried a few different Copilot tools. So GitHub Copilot came kind of fairly early doors, given Amazon Q a go as well. At the moment, I'm trying out the Windsurf editor and cursor as a sort of more integrated IDE experience. And both of them are fairly good. There's some really cool stuff being able to, like, if you want to just hack about on a project, I do quite a lot with the Streamlit Python package, which is a great way to build sort of data and AI apps with an acceptable user interface without having to know how to write good front-end code. And being able to just say, like, create me a project using Streamlit. It needs to be able to interact with Amazon Bedrock, like stub out the methods for me and get something fairly quickly. It is good for that. I think the only way that these tools will excel will really be with true understanding and context of what would be in a human brain. It's the getting into the flow state of, I understand this whole repository, I see how different pieces kind of connect together, but also if you've got microservice architectures and actually the context you need is in a different repository, then it also kind of needs that as well. So of course there are limitations. There's only so far these things will go, but I think from my stance, if somebody kind of turned up at an interview and they wanted to use an AI tool as part of a tech exercise, for example, then it wouldn't necessarily be it'd be hypocritical of me, right, to say, this is a bad thing. But I think I'd certainly be more aware and be a bit more careful about asking the right questions about the code that has been generated, because
I think that's sort of like one of the really important parts here is that most companies don't spend enough time evaluating their interview process for what the right questions are. And now they're starting to realize that AI is getting in the way of them, quote unquote, effectively evaluating the candidates. And I think that really goes to the fact that the question didn't make sense and their evaluation strategy didn't make sense, and that there are tools that can easily solve that. And if they can solve it during an interview or during a take-home interview test, then they could potentially or likely using that tool during their job. And I think we're already starting to see some companies intentionally telling candidates to use AI, LLM specifically, to solve the problem, because it is something that other engineers on their team are utilizing, and that they would expect someone who comes into the team to also understand and how to utilize those tools, because things like configuration or linting, etc., will be changed fundamentally by AI. And through that way, if someone who comes into your team that you're hiring into doesn't have experience utilizing LLMs to help them sufficiently, or handling the weaknesses, whatever they are, then they're going to not be as an effective team member when the rest of the team is expecting someone who is able to do that.
I mean, absolutely. And I think with how much of the industry and how much of businesses generative AI has the potential and promise to reach, there's almost prerequisites that a lot of people aren't really thinking about at the moment, because they kind of get blindsided by the AI is great, AI is going to solve all the problems. Whereas in reality, there are certain things that are foundational to successful use of AI. Like, okay, AI is software. How do you monitor your software? How do you make sure the responses from your AI-powered applications are what you expect them to? If you were deploying an API, you'd spend time in thinking about, okay, what are the useful metrics? Is CPU a useful metric, or is latency a useful metric? What are the things that actually have an impact on the end use of this? And AI should be no different. You should have that kind of production wrapper. You should have monitoring. You should have security concerns that you're proactively protecting against. But then also it's that foundation of data. If you're an organization that has lots of data in lots of different places and you want to use it in AI, you need to have like a good data platform. And you have conversations with people around productionizing some of their AI kind of proof of concepts or very early stage experiments they've done. And you sort of say, okay, well, you've managed to get these little samples of data from various data stores to prove that this as a concept could work and is worth putting into production at a wider scale.
So one of the problems is that with the pricing with a lot of the models today, if you're not running it yourself, you're pretty much paying for input and output tokens, the amount of context you're adding, which you need a very high context to get an adequate answer even. And then for whatever reason, these companies are charging you for garbage nonsense coming out of the models. Their decoding process to get back a readable answer has a lot of nonsense in it. Mm-hmm. And then you're paying for that. So I think the industry is being driven towards trying to optimize for these two things, which have nothing to do with the quality of the answer in the first place. Yep. And I know Will asked the question about bringing AI into the interview process. And I feel like, Will, you're now in a great position for me to ask you, do you feel like your interview process has been changing to respond to the increased usage, both in the workplace as well as candidates potentially using AI during the interview process itself?
For me, no, because my interview process is probably a lot more old school than most people. Like if I'm interviewing a candidate, we're going to have a straight up bullshit session because I work largely around infrastructure, and just through a casual conversation, I feel like I can get a lot better feel of whether you know what you're talking about or whether you have heard the terms but don't really understand what they mean. So a very small amount of my interview process has anything to do with like hands-on the keyboard, technical coding.
Do you have some part of it that's like any sort of technical validation or technical systems design or anything like that, which could be impacted by AI at all?
Potentially, yeah, because we'll do like an exercise of, throw together a couple microservices and explain to me the interaction between them. But then I'll spend a lot of time just talking about that, like, well, how does this part work? How does that part work? Tell me what happens if this does that. And I dig into a lot more of the operational stuff, I think. And like if a candidate could pregame all of that and use AI, good for them. I just think it's unlikely given the dynamic nature of my interview process.
So I don't want to spoil it, but there is a product out there where in a remote interview, the candidate will run it and it will listen to the audio that's coming across and watch the chat and then dynamically generate text response for the candidate to answer on the call. Now, I do think that there is a challenge here of being able to adequately understand what words are important in a sentence. Like if you have a thought and you're sharing that thought, you know what the point of that thought is and which nouns are more important than others. But if you're reading a response from something else, you might as well all say it all monotone because there isn't any part of that it makes sense up front to you. You almost need to read it first and then answer back. But that exists. So unless you're bringing people into the office, and obviously we want to optimize for more remote working environments, our company is 100% remote. I know a part of yours is, Will, I don't want to swear to that, but you do have different.
Yeah, we're 100% remote as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's only so much you can do there. I mean, you're not going to meet in person every single candidate at a coffee shop or something and go through sort of validation that they're not doing that. I mean, you have to use your other skills to sort of figure out whether or not there are, they believe what they're saying.
Yeah. And I think I would, in that scenario, I just rely on like our 60-day window. Like every candidate we bring on has like a 60-day trial period. And if the expectations didn't line up, we have 60 days to resolve that. And if not, cut ties.
Are you, at least for us, we're really transparent about that. Like if you're cheating during the interview process, that hurts you because we're just going to fire you a couple days or months later. Is that what you want? I mean, you're risking it by coming and joining us, just like we're risking it on you. And we both have the capability of ending that relationship. So, if you manage to get through our interview process, faking every step of the way, and then you also manage to fake the next couple of years successfully, I mean, I actually think that was a pretty good hire.
Yeah, agreed. Like if you're faking it because this is really where you want to be, and I pick up on that, I'll do everything I can to help you get there because that's how I got here. I lied through my teeth on job interviews.
That's how I got here too. I would just say I had a baby. That baby needed some food, and I was like, "All right, I don't know what we're talking about, but I have Google. Let's go figure this out."
Yeah, I mean, I read all 500 pages of the Microsoft SQL Server 6 book because that was the job I wanted.
I think this is where we can almost flip it on its head a little bit because AI can post-interview then play advantageous because if your interview process is cultural and it is assessing primarily person fit to a business and their ability with how they learn, how they interact with other people, then if you can make a great hire that has the ability to very quickly learn, land on their feet, is a great team player, then AI is a great tool to be able to assist in their upskilling of things they don't know technically once they have got in the door. So there's two sides to it, I suppose.
Oh, that's a really cool idea. I hadn't thought about that before. So instead of, so you just kind of flip it around and say, hey, AI, here's this dude. Where should I be helping them?
I think the part of the trouble with that is you would need to have only verbal, for the most part, interaction with the candidate during the interview, and have to go through the process of like, okay, we want to record this session so that, later we can feed it back through and make it available. And I know that, there's no reason why this should be a problem. But every single additional obstacle you add there is another risk for potentially losing out on the candidate. I feel like, hey, can we record this session and have this as a recording so we can share with the rest of the team? Is just another one of those things. So, I mean, if you're getting the value out, great. I think that's where I would love to see the tool that actually helps there.
I'm thinking of it from an individual perspective. If you are the hiring manager for a role and you're hiring someone that is like 90% of the way there, but they are 120% in terms of their ability to learn, that they will know the stuff given the opportunity to learn it, because they've demonstrated that, I don't know, they've picked up on these technologies in every job they've changed. They've come in relatively fresh. That's where they, as an individual, are able to potentially use AI to augment their learning, whether it is through Copilot type tools, whether it is ChatGPT, those kind of things where previously you would reach for Stack Overflow, which again, looking back on it, you think, well, yeah, Stack Overflow is great because you would get loads of answers to things, but you would still have to understand the answer because you don't know who that person is that's written that answer, much like you have no guarantee of what the model is outputting from its response. You can rely upon, you can take indication from the amount of kind of crowdsourced endorsement, I suppose, of a particular answer. And that's, I guess, where responsibility maybe goes more onto model providers to actually say, are the answers you are providing accurate? Maybe large language models are just too general for something. Maybe this is where the more niche models that are specifically focused on Python coding, for example, are a better fit because they have been trained on vetted best practice Python code. So many angles that you can explore with this. I feel like we could talk for hours.
Right. One of the things I'm doing, we're doing our annual performance reviews, and it consists of each employee gets peer reviewed, they do a self-review, and then I write their final review. One of the things I've been doing, it's taking a huge amount of time, but I feel like it's still worth it, is I'm giving AI the peer reviews and their self-review and my review, along with the responsibilities for their current level and the next level, and then asking AI, how can I help this person better meet the expectations of their current role and start growing towards their next level within the company. And it's been insightful because it's picking up on things that I'd overlooked when reading through the reviews myself.
I think that's a great use case, but the key bit in that is it's grounded by human effort that somebody has put in to start with. It's grounded by truth and actual knowledge. If you took the part where you write your review of that person away and said, okay, well, they've written a self-review, they've had a peer review from somebody else. Now let's use AI to write the employer review, make it this tone of voice. Here's some metrics about this person, how many lines of code they've written this year. Those kind of things where you could quite easily use AI for that, but that's where it then turns into this is a little bit too far.
Yeah, for sure. Because at that point, I would feel like, well, I'm not really adding any value here. their review came from AI at that point. I feel like I still got to put some skin in the game and do my job to help them.
Well, I think with that said, like a lot of industries are going to be creating verification processes that are specific to the problem. So this whole idea that the AI is going to be running amok, it's like, well, no, we don't really do that. That's not like how things in the real world work. So for example, in biotech, I think there's going to be a ton of AI generated drugs, but they still have to go through the same verification process as all the other drugs, which take years. You have to be able to create it, like just being able to create the thing. Just because the computer says that it's a valid drug and all that doesn't mean that it is. It still has to go through clinical trials and still has to go through peer review. And I feel like every industry is going to have it has something similar, right? Like, I don't know. So I don't worry about that one quite as much, except I worry a lot about greed in the loop. Like, that's the one that I worry about. Like, oh, look, now we can make all these biosimilars to, you know, this drug that this patent expired for, and we can just be pumping these out. And then, like, you know, if there's not enough like regulation and things, or if somebody can sort of get it pushed through any of these kind of verification steps, then I could see that going very, very sideways. So I'm just gonna hope that doesn't happen. And if it does, I'm going to move off to the woods and there's going to be no more computers in my life. And that's going to be that.
I think you hit on something that's quite ingenious here, actually, Jillian. If you just go through previous patents for drugs and then you ask an LLM to generate a new drug that has the same bonding, activation sites, the same interactions with other molecules, but is fundamentally different enough that it could be classified as a new drug that could be patented, then these companies will start losing a lot of money because their patents won't mean a lot anymore, and will have a lot cheaper medication in the world.
That's the hope. That's not actually how things have been going. I mean, like, I really appreciate your optimism there, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, if you look at like biologics, right? Like, biologics are probably, I think, are like one of the biggest medical innovations, you know, in like decades. And they're so expensive. They cost like, I don't know. I think Humira costs like a couple grand a month without insurance or something like that. So then, yeah, hopefully we do get this next wave where we're creating all the biosimilar drugs and so on and so forth. But I mean, when the biologics first came out, they had their patents and they had an absolute lock on the market. Legally speaking, you could not create a drug that was, you know, slightly similar. They're called biosimilars. You couldn't do that because there's legal red tape and stuff. But yeah, I hope so. That would be great if, you know, if like just producing these drugs got cheap enough that the patents were no longer even worth it, then that would be like a pretty huge disruptor to the medical industry.
I mean, it could be even worse, because the company that produced the drug initially, if they had used LLMs anywhere in their process, technically they can't patent it in the first place. So I think we're very close to the point where there will not be any patentable artifacts that exist in the world unless the fundamental laws are fundamentally changed.
I think we're already there, though, like and patents are still around. So I think it's less about the computery stuff, you know. So like, I work with a lot of companies and they're like, oh, can I patent this process, like the software process? And it's like, well, no, you shouldn't even really bother with that. Go patent the process that you use in the lab to actually create the drugs. And so that's where everybody's at. The actual like data generation is like a throwaway kind of, you know, like, yeah, it's just throwaway, because a lot of that has to be open anyways, like the data generation that you use to actually get to your drug, because it has to be like peer reviewed and all that kind of thing. But everything that goes on in the lab can still be a lot more, I don't know, it can still have a patent. See, and this is why greed in the loop is such a problem, because then there's always ways around the things, and then people want to be making money, which I get.
I feel like that's its own episode in itself, I think. Greed and software and tech companies. And
yeah, it could. A little bit depressing though. It's not like a fun topic.
Okay, so Jillian's like, I have tons of optimistic topics that we should talk about. Let's pick one of those, especially regarding any sort of AI or ML. Okay, I'm all for it.
Yeah, let's just talk about the cool stuff and not talk about, you know, potentially people flooding the market with crazy patents and then nobody getting their drugs. That's how that works.
So speaking of cool topics, Alex, you work with a lot of companies implementing AI into their business processes. A lot of our listeners are in the DevOps field or deal with software engineering and infrastructure. What are the key pieces of advice you would have for them to continue their career and be ready for the next evolution?
That's a great question. I think it's about embracing it, but also being super critical of the solutions and the tools that are available. So it's very, very easy to feel overwhelmed, I think, by the number of AI solutions that are available in any space. I think in DevOps particularly, if we're including kind of the developer side of that tools in there, we're just going to see more and more come out. I mean, there's a company I came across who their niche is co-pilot tools, but they only offer models trained on your company's data. So they haven't got like a public offering. They're aiming it at enterprise. So the idea is they train a model based on your organization's code bases. And that is your private co-pilot. So I think there's lots and lots to come in this area. Operationally, I think the whole, I guess, principle of DevOps is trying to break down that as a metaphorical wall between the two sides and empower developers to do operational tasks. I think we're seeing quite a lot come out around explaining operational events using generative AI and that kind of almost like trace analysis of, well, this happened. We've got 10 different data points here. How do we correlate them? How do we say this happened because this happened and this happened and this happened, and the chain reaction was this? Being able to, even as simple as put those things together in some sort of structured data, and then using a large language model to summarize it into a Slack message to say, this has failed, this is why. I think the one piece of advice I'd give people if they're looking to start experimenting with AI is like solve your own problems, find things in your processes, in your workflows that take the most time, and use AI almost as like your shadow, I suppose, would be a good way to describe it. So if you haven't got confidence in it straight away, tell it to do the same things that you would do, but build it so that it does it as a dry run. Make sure it is going to execute the same steps.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. Very cool. And that feels like a good segue into some picks. What do you think?
Some picks. So I would say, do your picks have to be physical or can they be software?
No, anything goes.
Anything goes. Okay. So I'm going to go for some that are related, some that are not. So my first one is AWS have a free to public generative AI experimentation website called Party Rock. This was born from it's actually an AWS engineer that built it internally as a way to experiment with large language models, and then it got adopted by AWS as an organization. So if you go to, I think the URL is partyrock.aws. There's no credit cards or anything required. Go on, you get a free amount of usage each month, and you can build these generative AI apps. One caveat is it's free, it's public. Don't go and upload like your company's financial records to it, or your personal data. It's if you're going to use that kind of data, just anonymize it first. Then what else? I'm going to go for something a lot of developers spend probably some money on, but I don't think you can spend enough money on it, which is keyboard and mouse. Like, sort yourself out with a comfortable mouse and a comfortable keyboard. The one that comes with your Mac or comes with your PC, it's functional, right? But after a while, it's going to hurt your wrists.
So what do you got?
My little Logitech MX Master 3. It has far too many buttons on it to know what to do with, but it's comfortable. And then I have a Keychron K2 mechanical wireless keyboard.
Nice.
Really slim for a mechanical keyboard, but super nice to type on as well. And you said socks were cool.
For sure.
That was my prep for this, was socks. So I have some really cool socks, but they've all come from conferences. I can't give people links to.
So maybe like which vendor gives out the best socks?
Right.
There were some I got from InfluxDB year before last, which they were really cool. They were like every color under the sun, super stripy, but really, really comfortable socks. Or the like holy grail of conference swag, which is the red hat, which you might be able to see like up there on top of the bookcase.
Yep.
Like swag is a bit of a debatable topic, but you can normally go to a conference with significantly less clothes than you need. Brave the expo on day one.
For sure. All right, Jillian, what'd you bring for picks?
I actually have a tech pick this week. I was looking for some type of UI to build out my Terraform code, mostly because of this AI product that I was talking about, where I deploy it like on the client site, and it has to have, like a database, an S3 bucket, a couple Lambda functions, and an EC2 instance. And I was like, wouldn't it be nice if there was just like a parameterized UI that I could just go and type and click a couple buttons, because I'm really in my I don't want to be typing era of my life. And I found Resourcely, and it is very, very cool. I would like to point out there is no way that I can afford their plan that's actually very useful. So this is part pick and part me e-begging. If the guys at Resourcely hear this, I could be the voice of your tool on the podcast, and I'm sure that would just be amazing. So there you go. But it's really neat, and I like that the backend is all just run by Terraform and Cookie Cutter, because those are just my two favorite tools of all time. It's like half my life is run with Terraform, Cookie Cutter, and Makefiles. And then once you throw in the Makefiles, it's like 90% of my life.
We definitely have a full sponsor section on adventuresindevops.com, where if someone wants to be a sponsor of this podcast, they can go there and read what we have and then decide if it's for them. Jillian, what I found that works is ask your customer how do incidentals work, and whether or not the usage of third-party tools to help cut down the amount of time that you would have to charge them for would be included under the contract. A lot of times the contracts that when I was doing consulting, you would include those in there. And of course you would charge that to the customer to optimize what they're actually getting out of the value that you're providing.
So that's always really tricky for me, just because the companies that I work for, they're not creating technology as their product. If they could get rid of me, they would. Okay, like if they could just be like, you just go away. We just want to work on our laptops with Excel. Like they absolutely would. So that one is always a little bit of a tough sell for me. Instead, I just start emailing people and try to get stuff for free, which is probably questionably like in terms of ethics. But that's what I'm doing.
I get emailed all the time, people asking stuff for free. So I mean, I don't think you're doing anything especially wrong there.
All right. Well, thank you for the ethical vote. Anyways, I do appreciate that. Sometimes I am a little bit like, maybe I'm a little bit too much on the side of the e-begging, but I do like money. So here we are. But it is a really great tool. It actually does generate you like this really nice UI. You can do, it has this sort of parameterized like in multi-tenancy built in that I really like, because I find a lot of tools, they just don't have that, and that tends to immediately not work for me because I'm so rarely working on my own AWS account, right? Like my AWS account is as bare bones as it can possibly be, just for dev for whatever it is that I'm working on, and then everything else is deployed on client sites. So it did genuinely look like a really nice tool that has like everything that I want, and I think that I can even make the free plan like mostly work for me, but we'll see.
Right on. Warren, what'd you bring for a pick?
Yeah, so I've got something really interesting. It's actually a old research paper from Yale in 2010. And the name of the paper is Comparing Genomes to Computer Operating Systems in Terms of the Topology and Evolution of the Regulatory Control Networks, or regulatory control networks for short. It compares the Linux operating system to E. coli bacterium. And I find this really interesting from an architecture standpoint of how what we build in technology is so wrong if we look at the evolution of biology for millions of years. You look at the evolution of E. coli and you see what's currently there. And it's only a 6-page paper. It's very short. And it really gives a lot of insight into the sorts of things we're building and whether or not we're building them effectively. And being in the infrastructure, systems design space, having new insights for how to build things or what actually is really important, I always find really interesting.
Is that from Wade Schultz?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I could be totally wrong. And so I don't want to swear to it. And I will have to confirm for you after the episode is over.
Right on. Because Wade's a really good friend of mine, and he's the head of computational health over at Yale, and that sounds exactly like something he would author. Right on. So my pick for the week, I'm picking a book this week, a sci-fi fiction book called Juris Ex Machina. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's from John W. Maley. It's a really cool book that has a lot of tie-ins to the episode we've talked about here today. It's a future Earth where the legal system has been largely replaced by AI, and the main hero of the story has been wrongly convicted, goes to prison. But it's a really well-written book. It's got a lot of super cool, nerdy tie-ins into it, and the writing is well done. It's fast-paced, so you get sucked into it immediately. And on top of that, in about a month, we're going to have John on the show to talk about the book and AI. So I'm looking forward to that episode. And so that's my pick for the week.
Awesome. I'm going to have to read this in preparation.
Yeah, it's been a really cool book. Like, I struggle to get into fiction books, but this one just like slurped me on in. Right on. Alex, thank you so much for joining us on the episode. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been good fun.
Right on. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. Appreciate your support. Jillian, Warren, thank you for joining me, co-hosting with me. And we'll see everyone next week.